The Royal Victoria Hospital, one of the most interesting and architecturally impressive locations that I've ever explored. Located in Montreal, it's built on the side of Mount Royal, overlooking the city. The hospital opened on a cold Saturday in December of 1893. Its founders, wanting Royal Vic to be used for the sick and ailing without distinction of race or creed. Upon its opening, it was boasted to be, quote, the finest and most perfectly equipped hospital on the great American continent. By the time I got there in 2024, the hospital was very locked down and in the process of being demolished and renovated. It had a reputation for being one of the hardest to get into places with tight security, 24/7 patrols inside and outside of the buildings. But I had to go and try to see what was inside to try and document the history and learn some of the story of Royal Vic's past. Royal Vic's massive Scottish baronial style buildings sit ominously and mysteriously. Walking its sterile halls, still lit, conjures up the imagination. Navigating around, you kind of get a grasp on how complex a hospital building is and all of the different areas it has. Upon its opening, the assistant architect, James R. Rind, wrote a letter to the Montreal Daily Star. He says, quote, "At the opening of Royal Victoria Hospital on Saturday, I heard a number of people remark that they could not tell where they were and that they were absolutely lost in the building. This was not strange when you consider the extent of the buildings and the many various departments into which a hospital is divided." The building I'm walking in now was the Women's Pavilion. Opened in June of 1926. This building is where most of Montreal's residents were born between that time until its closure in 2015. The building features an impressive surgical theater and is the main attraction for urban explorers. I thought this building was just extremely cool, and something about the atmosphere and the feeling at Royal Vic. It's just an interesting place that infatuates and makes you wonder about its past. The Women's Pavilion was located in a separate building from the main hospital. It acted as its own complete and separate hospital while still connected to the main building. It specialized in advanced gynecological care and obstetrics for women. Here is the Women's Pavilion Surgical Theater. You can imagine that many of Montreal's residents were born in this room. The room is built in an Art Deco style. The seating area was for medical students and residents to watch their professors perform medical operations and procedures. Most of these students and the professors were from the nearby McGill University. Here I walk around the steep semicircle tiered gallery seating. The theater was primarily used for surgical interventions during birth, such as C-section. Royal Vic has over the years gained a reputation for being a prominent place for medical research and learning. One of the hospital's medical achievements is being the site of the first successful kidney transplant in Canada, happening in 1958. Unfortunately, when I was there, the electricity had been cut to this room, I think in an effort to prevent photographers from wanting to find the site. Here we can see the skylight that originally would have lit the room before the surgical lights. The room's floors were designed to be in a way to be easily sterilized after surgeries. Here we can see some of the more modern components to the room. The room was in continuous operation from 1926 until 2015. Here is the recovery room. This is where the patients would be brought to rest and recover after surgeries. The history of the Women's Pavilion dates back to before its construction. The book The Royal Vic by Neville Terry tells its history. Its origins date back to 1843, when there were a number of so-called boarding maternity houses in Montreal. In 1843, the city's first lying-in hospital would open, known as Montreal Maternity. It would operate for over 80 years until after World War I, when the thought for a need for a new maternity hospital was considered. The book reads, quote, "Agreement was reached quickly, and 3 years later the Royal Victoria Montreal Maternity Pavilion, soon to be known simply to all as the Mat, and later as the Women's Pavilion, was opened to both private and non-paying patients. The site of the new building was to the east of the Ross Memorial Pavilion, on land that was previously a steep sloping apple orchard. The main building comprised of two wings which were joined at a central tower surmounted by a short steeple and clock tower. The building had 107 gynecology beds, 106 obstetrical beds, and 100 cots, plus the latest in supporting services. There was also accommodations for about 100 nurses, with a library and 2 sitting rooms. Here on the top floor is the hospital's clock. It was hand wound and is one of only 3 like it in existence. The others that exist are in the Smithsonian Institute and the Library of Congress. It was donated to the hospital by Walter M. Stewart. Until its mechanisms were moved when the hospital closed in 2015, the clock had to be wound by the security staff every 3 days. Its mechanisms have been saved and are supposed to be used in a new clock tower at the new Royal Vic campus. Over its time in operation, many doctors, nurses, and staff have dedicated their time and expertise in order to care and attempt to cure patients that came through these walls. I find it important to mention the dedication that went into this. Originally, when Royal Victoria Hospital opened in the late 1800s, when someone signed up to be a nurse here, they were expected to work 6.5 days a week and live on the hospital's grounds in the nurses' residence. There were many working long, tireless hours inside of this hospital. In fact, originally, in the late 1800s, to be a nurse here, you were required to work 6.5 days a week and live on the hospital grounds in the nurses' residence. They also expected that you were not to marry. A total dedication to nursing and the hospital was required. Here I walk down the passageway that originally led to the front entrance of the women's pavilion. Although I didn't go the full way, I was kind of paranoid that maybe security could be sitting there because I really didn't know where they were and I didn't want to push my luck. I was trying my best to get in the other buildings on the campus. Here I am trying to go through a tunnel, but every way was blocked off. This led towards the Ross Pavilion, but actually I think it just went the whole length of the women's pavilion because it just ended in a dead end. Right next to the women's pavilion seen here was the Ross Pavilion. The Ross Pavilion was originally opened as a private ward for paying patients. It's from this building that we get one of the most interesting ghost stories. It's said that hanging on the walls was a painting. The painting was of a house and a landscape, and it was reported from time to time by patients and staff that an old lady would appear in the window looking out, and sometimes she would walk out of the house and look around before going back in. The painting and the story was so disturbing to patients and staff that eventually the staff decided to remove it from the wall in order to not scare anyone. At 7 a.m. on Sunday, April 26, 2015, 154 patients were transferred from the old Royal Vic to the new Glen Super Hospital by a convoy of ambulances in what was called the biggest hospital move in Canadian history. The campus's closure marking the end of over a century of care to the Montreal citizens. Its new Glen site boasting a massive modern hospital to continue its operation. The old Vic is now being converted into McGill University labs. They've demolished some of the 1950s structure, and some of the old 1800s buildings are going to be converted into that lab space. I'm very fortunate and appreciative to have been able to explore some of the inside of Royal Vic. These buildings are so mysterious and fascinating. And I don't think you'll be able to find another place quite like it. Its castle-like grounds really spark the imagination, making one wonder. You can only imagine all the different stories from all the different people that went through here. Really, places like this fascinate me and are so interesting to explore.